Hi, my name is Caitlin, and I really, really hate my dad. He is such a control freak. It's unreal. It started out being kind of funny, but then everything got a whole lot worse. I guess it all started when I first went to high school. I was so happy to start my new classes and make new friends, but my dad was so overprotective all the time. He wouldn't let me walk to school. Instead, he drove me to school and walked me to the doors like I was a baby. It was super embarrassing in front of all of my other classmates. He'd give me a kiss goodbye and call me silly pet names like Sweetie and Pumpkin, which made everyone else laugh at me. One day, a bunch of guys started teasing me and calling me Sweetie. They were making kissing noises at me too. Definitely not what you want hanging over your head as you start high school. I mean, my reputation was already ruined before I'd even had a chance. But I loved my dad, and I didn't want to upset him, so I let it carry on, and after a little while, he eased up. Time passed, and things kinda got back to normal. Dad started to just drop me off outside instead of walking me all the way to school. But they weren't. It got worse when this guy at school named Owen, that I really, really like, asked me out on a date. I was so totally psyched to go. It was going to be my very first date ever. I'd never been happier. Then when Owen and I got to the restaurant, oh my God, guess who we found sitting at the freaking table next to us? My dad. He kept trying to hide his face behind a menu like he was a spy on a secret mission, but really, he just looked so silly. I thought my date would be pissed, but he actually found it funny. We laughed a lot about how totally stupid parents can be, and when we finished our food, we got the waitress to send a note to my dad asking him to meet us at the bar. When he had his back turned, Owen and I slipped out the door and carried on with our date in peace. When I got home, my dad was fuming and he wouldn't even talk to me. I guess he didn't like getting a taste of his own medicine. After that, though, everything was 10 times worse. My dad stopped giving me any space at all. He followed me absolutely everywhere I went. Then there was a school trip to go to Washington, D.C. and visit the Lincoln Memorial. I was so excited. But, of course, my dad had to find some way of ruining it. He turned up on the day we were supposed to leave and argued with my teachers for an hour, asking them to let him go on the trip with us. He wanted to sit on the bus as well, but of course he wasn't allowed. I begged him to stop and just go home. I didn't understand why he wanted to come so bad, and it was so frustrating. I thought he'd given up, but nothing ever seemed to stop him. As we drove off, I looked out the back window, and oh my God, my dad's car was following us. I couldn't believe he'd go this far. There was nothing I could do, though. I felt so helpless. I just figured he'd get a lecture from my principal when we got back, but then he did something you'll never believe. He pulled up in front of the bus and slammed on the brakes, forcing us to stop. The bus driver was totally mad, and so were all my teachers. My dad ran up to the door and started banging on it until it opened. He said the bus driver was going way too fast and that he was going to get me killed in an accident. When everyone called him crazy, he said he was going to call the police to question the driver. Except they ended up arresting my father instead of the driver. I was so humiliated I couldn't bear continuing the trip. I called my mom to come pick me up and take me home. We talked about Dad, and she said she had no idea why he was doing this all of a sudden either. I'd never been so frustrated in my life. If I had an answer, then maybe I could understand why my dad, who used to be fun and cool, was being such a bonehead lately. But there was nothing I could do, so I went upstairs to use the computer to try and get some work done. When I saw a folder I've never really looked at before. It was called Ellie. I didn't know why I did it, but I clicked on it and it asked me for a password. Right then, I knew something fishy was going on. So I tried a bunch of different words to see what worked. The make of my dad's car, my mom's name, my dad's date of birth. Then I tried my name, and oh my God, it worked! And you'll never believe what I found. My dad had a whole bunch of old pictures of him with another young girl. She must be Ellie. She looked really similar to me and must have been around my age when the pictures were taken, so she had to be some kind of relative, right? But I'd never heard of her before. And there were no photos of her being any older. It was super weird. I printed the pictures off and showed it to my mom. She cried and confessed that before I was born, my father had a sister named Ellie who died in a tragic car accident while my dad was driving. She said that my dad blamed himself for her death and that it was painful for him to even talk about. She'd gotten rid of all the pictures of my aunt in the house because they made my dad cry when he saw them. I had so many questions, but my dad was the only one with the answers, so I had to wait for my mom to get him from the police station. When he came home, I confronted him, and he broke down. He said that as I grew up, I started to look more and more like my Aunt Ellie. I reminded him so much of his sister, and he didn't want to let anything bad ever happen to me like it did to her. At first, he was just worried about car accidents, but over time, he said that the world is such a dangerous place that he wanted to follow me to make sure no one else managed to hurt me. He apologized and said he knew he overreacted, but he loved me and didn't want to lose me. It was totally awful. I cried and hugged my dad. I told him it wasn't his fault and that everything was going to be okay. To help him deal with his worries, I promised my dad that nothing bad will happen to me the way it did to his sister. I was never going to leave him the way she did. I told him that from now on, I was going to make sure he knows I'm safe, and we made a deal that I'll always call him and that he won't follow me everywhere I go anymore. I couldn't stay mad at my father forever after seeing what he'd been through. I understand a little more why he was acting so crazy, and besides, no matter what he does, he'll always be my dad.